Welcome to the Real Love podcast series, right here on the Sharon Salzberg Metta Hour. This series features a variety of conversations with some of the world's finest teachers and thinkers, all exploring Sharon's new book, Real Love, The Art of Mindful Connection. Real Love is a field guide for anyone seeking awakened living in the 21st century. To get your copy of Real Love, visit SharonSalzberg.com. This podcast is brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, please visit www.BeHereNowNetwork.com/Sharon.
Good evening. You ready for a story? A friend who shops at the same small grocery store as I do recently mentioned how shocked he was to realize that he never paid much attention to the woman who rings up his purchases day after day. She might as well be a cash register with arms, he said. He determined that the next time he went into the store, he would give the clerk his full attention. He reported back a few days later. The first thing I noticed was that she was singing along to something on the radio, and that she has a beautiful voice. And when I told her that, she gave me a radiant smile. Listening to my friend, I realized that I too had hardly noticed the woman. Did she often look a bit sad? I began to imagine my next trip to the store. I'd tell her I'd heard she had a beautiful singing voice and make her day. But when I actually went in and looked for her, she was already smiling broadly. Of course, not everyone we encounter in our everyday lives, whether it's passersby at a grocery store or a colleague at work, will have a beautiful voice or a warm smile to convince us immediately to love others. But there is immense power in the act of showing up for life, in paying attention to other people, to experiences, sounds, and sights. Loving others, whoever they may be, is about seeing and recognizing the basic wish to be happy in ourselves and in others. This wish to be happy is something we share, and simply acknowledging that is the foundation of real love. Of course, I'm reading from the book Real Love by Sharon Salzberg, and it's one of the reasons that we all get to be here together tonight and talk all about love. We're in for a treat. And we get to do that with two incomparable women. And of course, I'm talking about the author of the book, Real Love, Sharon Salzberg, who is the author of this and 9 other books at this point. World-renowned meditation teacher, and in addition to that, we have the pleasure of welcoming back to our stage the 4-time Grammy award-winning singer-songwriter and the author of several books and essays, including her memoir, Composed, Rosanne Cash. So we're talking tonight not just about love, but about a particular expression of love, the creative act. And when I think of that, of course, I think about the galleries upstairs. Those of you who are here with us know that we are a museum of Himalayan art here at the Rubin. For those of us joining us on Facebook Live, Instagram Stories, or maybe listening to Sharon's podcast, The Metta Hour, welcome to you all as well. We are here at the Rubin Museum of Art in the heart of Chelsea in New York City, and at the heart of our collection are works of art that are from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and many of which are made by monks and artisans as a pure devotional act, an act of love, and are really symbols of love themselves. But of course, we can find love and experiences of love in many different artistic outlets. And I'm thinking, as we were preparing for tonight, I was thinking about the power of a song, and even how the saddest song can make you feel good. And just that act of connection, and how powerful that is, to be seen, to feel understood, and to know that we're not actually in isolation at all. So, of course, we can see this act of love in the two artists that are here with us tonight, and we see that easily in Rosanne's work, and also in the artistry of Sharon's teaching. She teaches here regularly in our weekly mindfulness meditation series. And I've really come to appreciate the artistry of her teaching. And I know I see many familiar faces. Anybody here who's been to that series, our weekly lunchtime Wednesdays meditation series? Great. So we'll turn it over to these two ladies whom maybe they don't know this, but we refer to them as our resident female Buddhas. They are both scribes, both creatives, and both really experts in this act of exchanging love, and perhaps in their personal lives, but really what a gift they give to the public when they do what they do. And that's a gift of love. Let's welcome them, Rosanne Cash and Sharon Salzberg.
Thank you. Hi, Sharon.
Hi. Hello. You're kind of out there. Good. I can sort of see you. Hello, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here with you, really. It's a
Me
tremendous
too.
honor.
I plan on learning a lot.
Me too. It's great. So we thought we'd begin with a really short meditation and hopefully have time for a slightly longer one as the evening gets on. But just to begin with more fully arriving and actually landing in this place, in this time. So just for a few minutes, if you could settle your attention on the feeling of your breath, wherever you feel it most distinctly, and rest. In my early meditation practice, sometimes I would be so hypervigilant, I'd have to say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. So it's kind of like that. Let's just feel it. You're breathing anyway. So thank you. It always surprises me how even just a few moments can bring me so much more here. It's pretty great, actually. So love. I feel like I've been dwelling in the neighborhood of love for so long. The effort, the time of writing the book, and now the birth of the book, and talking about the book, and There were a couple of things that really came to mind when I was thinking about love and creativity. Well, a few things actually, but one was something I had told you that working on this book reminded me in many ways of an earlier experience I had writing a book called Faith, where there were many times when I was really struggling and I couldn't see my way forward. And at one point with Faith, I talked to this fabulous writer, Susan Griffin, who's both writing and coaching writing. And she said two things to me that were really amazing. She said, first of all, she said, you have to stop thinking of yourself as the person writing this book and think of yourself as the first person who gets to read this book. And that was tremendous because I had so much fear, I guess, about doing it justice. I wanted to do it right, and it was such a highfalutin topic, and it was so magnificent and amazing, and I thought, I'm not going to hit it. You know, I'm going to really compromise. It's not going to be right. And then with her encouragement, I more or less let go of that. And I was just, the words would appear on the monitor, and I'd be so excited. Oh, look, words. I get to read it.
That's interesting that you experienced that same insecurity. And I mean, that's definitive of being a writer or an artist, those moments where you think, this is crap, and why am I doing this? And it'll never be as good as so-and-so's book or song or whatever. And then you push through, and suddenly a field appears before you that you can get to.
Yeah.
But your book, I told you earlier that it was working on several levels with me. It was reading the words and doing the practices that you prescribe. But I felt the oddest sense that the book was meditating me.
That makes me so happy.
It was working at a really subtle level,
Yeah,
and I know you know what I mean.
Yeah,
It was like it's seeping into your DNA and awakening something that I probably already knew.
I'm sure you definitely already knew it.
Well, but not in the way you know it. That's what's fascinating to me. Some of the things you talk about, I know in my work, but I don't know in relationships. It was interesting to see how it's all the same. Like we talked about the inner critic.
Yeah. That ferocious inner critic.
That ferocious inner critic. And the way you wrote about it is exactly, almost identical words of what I would say to my songwriting students. Like that the inner critic can dismantle you, and you've got to get it out and objectify it, get it outside of your body to see what it is. But then I tell them something which is to bring it back later on to edit.
Yeah. That I had never considered that. The relative worthiness of the voice of my inner critic, which, as many of you know, I named Lucy. I really apologize to any Lucys in the room or online, anywhere in the world, actually. Every Lucy that exists. It's Lucy after the character in the Peanuts comic strip. Having once seen a cartoon where Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown and says, oh, you know, Charlie Brown, what your problem is, the problem with you is that you're you. And then poor Charlie Brown says, what in the world can I do about that? And then Lucy says, I don't pretend to be able to give advice. I merely point out the problem. And I saw the cartoon. A friend of ours had rented a house for many of us to do a retreat in, and it had been left in the room, designated for me. And whenever I walked by that desk, and my eye would fall on that line, the problem with you is that you're you. And because that Lucy voice had been so dominant in my earlier life, and so I named my inner critic Lucy, and I sort of mapped my understanding of mindfulness and my progress with mindfulness with how I related to her. And so what I came to, actually, it was very soon after I saw the cartoon, something great happened for me. And my very first thought was, it's never going to happen again. And I responded with, hi, Lucy. And followed by, chill out, Lucy. Which I considered really kind of a triumph in a way, because it was so different than, you're right, Lucy, you're always right. And it was so different than, oh my God, Lucy's here, what a disgrace, I'm so ashamed, I can't believe she's still here. But I never considered, I was always trying to be nice to her, you know, and kind of cordial without letting her take over. But I never actually thought about sitting down with her and saying, okay, now everyone's calmer.
Well,
Tell me.
I did something similar a long time ago. I painted, and I painted my inner critic, and there were these evil little creatures. There were about 10 of them, and I called them the committee. And I actually made a T-shirt of the committee so I could really get them out. But I realized that they want a job, and that if you bring them as a writer, if you bring it back at the end of the process to help you edit, then they're happy, they have a job.
It's fantastic. I guess I have to write another book.
But you know, there's a similar story about the problem with You Is You. The musician, jazz musician, Charlie Parker, one of the greatest musicians, he was a heroin addict, and he was going off to Paris on a trip and to get away, and his friend said to him, you know who will be waiting when you get off the plane? You. It's like you can't get away.
Yeah.
You got to take yourself with you.
Yeah, you always find yourself wherever you go. It's like, oh, you again.
Oh, you again.
Well, it's funny when you said that, though, about understanding, because I ended up, I learned so much from this woman, Susan, when I was trying to write Faith, and I ended up putting a huge, giant quote of hers in the middle of the book, and then quite a number of years later, I ended up on the phone with her because I had met this Tibetan nun who'd been a freedom fighter and escaped and became a nun, and we were trying to find somebody to write the story of her life. So I was on the phone with Susan, and she said, I was reading your book, and it was really amazing, and there was like, I realized, I don't understand this, and I don't know this, and I don't see things this way. What a revelation. And then I turned the page, and there was a whole huge long quote from me. And I said, see, you do understand. I learned it from you. I read what you wrote, and I went, oh, right, that's the perfect way of saying it. So I think we all actually probably do know, and we forget.
You know, something you said in the book, too, about, this is kind of a segue, it's tangential in a way. But anyway, about 3 people in a relationship, you, me, and the space between us. That is such a beautiful concept that it's inspired me to write about it myself. But I started thinking about that in terms of music, that if the space, you, me, and the space is actually music, what that does to a relationship, because I'm married to my collaborator, and we work together a lot. And I think I told you, I don't think we would still be together if we didn't perform together, because of the healing power of music, but also because you see the essence of someone when they're performing and what they give to an audience and how exquisitely beautiful that is and vulnerable, and how could you hold on to petty things when you see the essence of someone. And I was talking to Diana Krall about this because she's married to Elvis Costello, and I don't know very many couples who do the same thing like that. And she's saying it's identical for me. She said, I can absolutely hate him that day, and then he gets on stage and I see who he is, and your heart melts. But I wanted to ask you about the space, if it's not music, what else it could be that would enhance the 2 people, you, me, and the space.
Right. Well, I think it's authenticity, because I had this image, as you were saying it, of somebody getting up on the stage in another way. Like I don't play music with people. I often team teach with people, or involved in different collaborations. And even as you said, get up on the stage, I had an image of years and years ago when I first went to India, which was I went in 1970, and I was still wandering around looking for a teacher and looking for a practice, and it was still 1970. It was right toward the end of the year. I went to a yoga conference, an international yoga conference in New Delhi, which was a really dismal affair, and the low point of which was the yogis and swamis up on the stage pushing and shoving against each other to be the first to grab the mic and speak. And it was by the sheerest of coincidences that Actually, Dan Goleman, who was at the time a psychology student studying meditation, happened to be delivering a paper at that conference. And he mentioned he was on his way to an intensive 10-day meditation course. I thought, that's it. And it was it. But that image, obviously, people don't always do that blatantly, but there could be a lot of that going on, up on the stage. There's artifice, or there's that extra thing of, so it's beautiful. What you're talking about is the most open, authentic.
Well, that's right. And my idea and understanding of performing has changed over the 38 years I've been doing it. In the beginning, I thought it was a way to get judged.
Yeah.
That you went on the stage to be judged, and that perfection was part of what you were attempting. So many things you talk about in your book, not about performance and music, but the light bulb kept going off. And over time, I've come to realize it's not about that at all. It's about energy exchange. Yeah. And it's about feelings. Bob Dylan said an audience doesn't come to feel my feelings. They come to feel their own feelings. They want you to open it up for them so that they can feel it. So that, to me, is love. Yeah. And oftentimes during concert, as people do in an audience, someone will yell out, "I love you, we love you." And Sharon, my first thought, I realized reading your book that my first thought whenever someone says that is, you don't really know me. And that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
But then I always say, I love you too. Isn't
that's
funny?
The space in between.
There you go.
That is the space in between.
Right, you don't know me, but I love you too, and this is what we're all working towards, right?
No, it's true. In the beginning of my teaching career, I was terrified of public speaking. I could never, ever give a talk. And the construct, the schedule of our retreats is that you practice in different ways all day with some teacher contact or maybe questions and answers. And there's one formal lecture every night. So the first retreat I actually taught in this country was with my colleague, Joseph Goldstein. It was 30 days, and he had to give every talk. Because I couldn't. I was petrified. I couldn't do it. I thought, my big fear was that my mind would go blank, and I would just sit there and be completely humiliated, and I could not do it. And people kept coming up to him, yelling at him, saying, "Why won't you let her have a voice? Why won't you let her speak?" And he kept saying, "I'd love a night off, just talk to her, Couldn't do it. And then probably a year or more went by, and I thought, there is this one topic, loving kindness, where there's a guided meditation you can do. So if my mind goes blank, I can launch into the guided meditation. Maybe nobody will notice. So at home in Massachusetts, I have piles and piles and piles of cassette tapes because I can only give one talk on loving kindness. It was all the same talk. And then a long, long time went by, and I thought, you know what? It's all about loving kindness. It's all about connection. That's why we're in this room together.
That's right.
It's not about my expertise in something. It's just about connection. And that was the moment I could begin to give talks.
I've learned that myself in performing, I used to have dreams about forgetting lyrics or something. Every time I've forgotten a lyric, that's the moment the audience loves the most. Your humanity is revealed, and they feel connected to that. Yeah. They don't want perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. Is that the saying?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's really true. And I told Pema Chodron that I was so afraid of.
Wait, you told Pema Chodron something?
Yes, I did. We were having lunch together. And I said,
I love that.
I was always
Me and Pema were sitting around and... No, go ahead.
Yes,
sorry.
No.
It gives me a little thrill.
It was thrilling for me, too. I said I was always terrified of speaking because I was afraid my mind would go blank. And she said, I was always terrified of speaking because I was afraid I was going to just detour into some topic that was completely tangential. And she said, in all these years of doing that, no one's complained. No one's come up and said, you started out talking about that, and you ended up talking about that. How could you? It's like, here we are together,
There was something else I wanted to ask you about. And this also, seen through the lens of a performer and an artist. This whole concept of self-love, it makes me a little nervous after a certain point, because where's the line between self-love and self-indulgence, self-absorption, to the exclusion of service, to the exclusion of other people's feelings, or like I have a friend who, whenever there's any hint of conflict, she'll say, I must take care of myself, and she slams the door on you and there's no more conversation. She thinks that that's self-love, and to me it's hurtful and dismissive and disrespectful. So how, and a lot of, okay, so here's more specifically a question. So I teach songwriting quite often and go into schools, and I run into this phenomenon regularly, which is a young songwriter who thinks that he doesn't need to know the tradition he's writing in, or any songwriters who came before him, or what a rhyme scheme means, or the mechanics of melody or verse chorus structures, or any of the mechanics, any of that, because his expression is enough. And to me, that's completely self-indulgent.
Yeah.
But some would say, well, that's valid, his expression. I said, well, that's what toddlers do. That's, art requires discipline. Explain, Sharon.
I agree with you here, too.
Oh, good.
There's a Thai monk who used to say, it's not a question of following your heart, it's a question of training your heart.
Oh, I love that. That's good.
I think about it largely, I think, in terms of balance. Like for many of us, with Lucy, the strongest thing going, and that tremendous kind of sense of blame and failure, the balance is actually moving away from that and having some kindness towards yourself and being able to begin again. It's like resilience training, like, I blew it, I made a mistake, let me start over, rather than collapse. Or just blame myself for the next 15 years,
Right.
And so that's a lot of what that kind of conversation is about. Let's move away from that. And there can definitely be a place where, it just becomes, it's like a parody or satire almost of itself, like I'm being nice to myself, so I'm therefore.
Yeah. Well, go back for a second about something you said made me think about maternal guilt. And, I have 5 children, and so I have maternal guilt in spades. Because, the worst thing in the world is to see your child suffer.
Yeah.
And even worse than that is to know or think that you caused any suffering.
Yeah.
And to be aware of something later on that you realize that child didn't need that at all. I shouldn't have done that if I'd only done that. So you do talk about this in the book, too, about loving yourself through regret and guilt. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. In the Buddhist psychology, there's actually with this kind of an excruciating, exactitude about words, there's a difference between remorse and guilt. Remorse being the kind of genuine pain of seeing, I blew it, or could have done better, or I really broke the fabric of some trust, or whatever it was, and lessons learned. I want to move on. I want to move on with determination to see more clearly. And whereas guilt is not having the ability to move on. It's being stuck. Like, I am the terrible parent I always have been, I always will be. It's never going to change. I'm only that. I've never done anything good for my children. This is the only thing I've ever done. And it's really being frozen in time, which is, in a way, that's what trauma is also. It's like freezing, being stuck in that way. And so,
how do you break the stuckness, though?
Well, some of it is actually it's wisdom. It's understanding that, this isn't serving. This is an old habit. Hi, Lucy. Have a cup of tea, just relax. I'm going to see what I might do, in terms of making amends or lessons learned, and move into that kind of more positive direction. There's also a certain sense of, I've at times taught with his friend Mark Epstein, who's a psychiatrist here in town, and has written many books on Buddhism and psychotherapy. And his favorite, his mentor in a way, I doubt they ever met, but was D.W. Winnicott, who's a psychoanalyst in Britain, and he's always quoting him. And one of his quotations is, just be a good enough mother. Just be good enough. And people protest in terms of gender, and he says, well, he was in Britain, and the only people bringing their kids were the mothers, so that's what he said, but it means be a good enough parent. Since someone in the room always says, well, what does it mean to be a good enough mother? And Mark says, it means surviving your child's rage. And then someone says, what does it mean to survive your child's rage? And Mark says, it means don't be too invasive and don't be withdrawn. Like hang in there with the feeling, be fully present with what is. And then I always say, that's what we call mindfulness. That's exactly what we do with ourselves.
And so how would, you also talk about how our earliest relationships hardwire our understanding of future relationships. And so how do you break that chain? Through mindfulness as well?
Yes, everything's... I think it's the intentionality, actually. Right. In that...
your own suffering, you talk about that. Your own childhood and how you brought love into that.
Yeah. I can't remember if this is in the book or not. I always have a hard time writing it because it's very visual memory. But I was on the stage once with the Dalai Lama. Sorry.
Was Pema there as well?
No. She wasn't, but I was on the stage once with the Dalai Lama and Mathieu Ricard, who's a French.
I was on the stage with Bob Dylan.
I'm impressed. I was going to say, I don't know, Elvis Costello, Diana Krall. The meeting of worlds. So anyway, I was on the stage with the Dalai Lama and Richard Davidson, who's a neuroscientist in Wisconsin, studying meditation, and Barbara Fredrickson, who's a researcher studying meditation in North Carolina, and a few other people. And Barbara and Richie got into this thing with the Dalai Lama about good parenting, and coming from a warm, nurturing, affectionate home. And the Dalai Lama started talking about his mother, who he always says was his greatest teacher. Mm-hmm. She taught me compassion. She taught me everything. And I could feel the mood in the room was going down, because it was all about how hard it is if you didn't have that. Even the term hardwired, it's so harsh,
Right.
And I could feel everyone's getting as depressed as I feel right now. And so I raised my hand. And I said, well, I'm sure that's true, but I didn't have that kind of childhood. And this is why it's so visual. Both the Dalai Lama and his translator, their mouths went, "Aww." And I never knew how to write that, "Aww." They look so sad. And then I said, but what I had was a strong intention. I wanted to be better. I wanted to make a different kind of life. And out of that intention, I found it's kind of the sources of that love and ways to love, and I found it without that, and I found everyone so happy in the room.
That's a really ephemeral and kind of inexplicable thing, though, because I had that too. I had a tough childhood too. My father was a drug addict, and my mother was enraged about it and very distracted, and I was very resilient. I created imaginary adults who were safe.
Yeah.
And I was an artist, and I knew it early on. And I knew that could save me. Art and music could save me, and it has many times. Mm-hmm. But I have siblings who didn't have that, and who, even though are alive, some have not survived our childhood.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have survivor's guilt over that. And I just wonder, what is it in certain people that you can survive, and that you're longing for love and art and healing is so great that it will carry you through terrible trauma.
Yeah.
And other people who give up right away, who don't have the longing, which I actually think longing is a wonderful thing to keep your whole life.
Yeah.
not to get rid of it with anything, with love, even
yeah.
love. But what is that? And some people that other people don't have, and why? It's so sad.
Yeah,
It's
it is very
heartbreaking.
sad. But I would say, you know, even if someone doesn't have it throughout much of their life, I wouldn't give up on them, you know, and the possibility of that turning around, I just wouldn't. And but of course, clearly it's true. I think for me, it wasn't even so much the longing, although I actually agree with you that that kind of longing channels us through everything. But there was some kind of knowing. Like I look back, you know, I left for college when I was 16. I left for India when I was 18. I had done an Asian philosophy course. There was the possibility of going to India or going anywhere in the world through an independent study program. I created a project, said I want to go to India and learn how to meditate. And they accepted it, and I got on an airplane. I'd never even been to California. Wow. You know, like, and I think, how did I know? You know, there was something in me that just knew. There's something else. There's something there for me. Right. There's something in that system, that way of thinking. There's something that will be there for me, something truthful for me. I mean, I was in college in Buffalo. I could have stayed there, I suppose, and, you know, studied. I could have studied Buddhism. I could have gotten a doctorate. I could have, you know, done whatever. But I got on that airplane at the age of 18. And I think something in us does know. So along with the yearning, there's a confidence or...
Yeah, and that mystery of why do you know, how do you know? I mean, that in that mystery is a lot of art and music, too.
Yeah. You see, I never think of myself as an artist except when I'm introduced as one, so, which I always like. So thank you. And then I think, oh, I write. Actually, I write. That's art.
You know, when Dawn was speaking earlier, I was thinking, she said something that made me think about the love in music. I remember right after 9/11, you know, those few months after 9/11 were so tough here, and we lived downtown, and my kids were downtown at school, and it was so traumatic and awful. And then you remember the plane crash that happened in December. So it was like this series of events, if you were in New York, that was just horrifying. And I was stoic, and I had little kids, and, you know, I was just plowed through. And then was sitting in the kitchen listening to the radio at Christmas, the British Proms, and they played Barber's Adagio for Strings, which is, I think, the saddest piece of music ever written. And those 3 months just came flooding out of me. Just, I cried to the depths of my being. And that piece of music, it healed me from the experience. It truly did. And it's the same with my husband, you know. Sometimes I just hate him when I walk on stage. And I'm so annoyed with him, and we've been in a fight. And I see him and hear him play and see his essence, and it heals you. It's remarkable, because a lot of times when I can't relate to people, I can relate to art and music.
Yeah.
A great painting, great piece of literature. Do you turn to that yourself?
I do in certain ways. I think that in like Asian tradition or Buddhist tradition, the thing that makes a work great is the transformation of the artist in the process of creating it. So I'm sure you intuit that when you are looking at something or reading something or listening to something. And I think that I do as well. You know, like I love being upstairs here, you know, and just looking at something and thinking, you know, feeling like, oh, maybe this took 20 years to create this one piece.
But they broke through into something. They touched a mystery.
Yeah.
That's what the most beautiful thing for me is to feel that they did touch it, you know.
Yeah.
And it often brings up more questions than any answers.
Yeah, which is great. And it's interesting as a writer, you know, because can I do a book of questions next? I don't know. You know, there's another thing this woman, Susan Griffin, said to me way back when I was working on faith. She said, a lot of people think you would write a book about a topic like that because you're an expert and you want to impart your expertise. But more likely you're writing about a topic like that because that's part of the work.
Yes.
You know, the writing itself is part of the attempt to be in that immersion and understand it.
Well, and personally, you probably wanted to know more about it
Yeah,
too, and
yeah,
the way
yeah.
to find out more is write it. I mean,
That's right.
when I was writing my memoir, it was startling to me how many boxes I unpacked about my own life and was able to organize my thoughts around it. That's why that happened. That's the motivation of that person. That's why I left that person.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's why I cut that tie. That's thread still exists. That one I had to cut.
Yeah, yeah.
I found out so much, you know. I mean, and ultimately, like you said, you're the first person to read the book.
Yeah, yeah.
I wrote it for myself.
Yeah, no, totally. Totally. And that's what, I think that when I said authenticity, and there are a lot of ways of playing a piece of music, and a lot of ways of writing a piece, you know. There's certainly ways of writing a piece where you are attempting to impart your expertise. And that's very different than that bearing of the soul and that really being there.
Right. I think people don't care as much about expertise as they do about humanity.
Yeah, yeah.
Vulnerability.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of pressure off, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I
can't write, sorry.
You don't have to fear being wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wonderful.
What's your next book going to be? You just got this one out, right? Your publisher is sitting there going...
It's sitting right there. Somebody sent me some notes. She said, I think you should write a book about home, because everybody really wants a sense of home. They want a sense of belonging. And I, as I've said on this stage actually in the past, I have a great, great, great thing about the Statue of Liberty. I love the Statue of Liberty, and she thrills me, and the symbol of it. And I'm very devoted to her. And I've even got a few little green, things, erasers and stuff. And I once contemplated getting like a 6-foot Statue of Liberty, but I didn't do it. I love her. And so somebody told me they were going to see her tomorrow, actually, yeah. And I thought, oh, well, that's what she symbolizes for me, like welcome home. And I just, as you did, just came back into the country. I came from England, and I was feeling kind of sad because it's all done by machine now.
Yeah.
And there used to be somebody, even though if they grilled you and it felt a little odd, like, what do you do for a living? I teach meditation. They would end with saying, welcome home. And I realized I really missed somebody saying welcome home at customs and immigration. Yeah, it was different, so,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, this book.
Do you find yourself feeling like a beginner every time you start a new project?
Yeah.
I always feel that as well. And I love that, because I think the air gets taken out of everything if you feel like there's nothing new and you know exactly what you're doing. But, it's always a little thrill going into the studio or walking on stage or starting a new song, like, how do I do this again?
Yeah,
and then some sense of mastery takes over, but the thrill remains if you feel like a beginner.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's very Buddhist too, isn't it? Too?
It's extremely Buddhist.
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama, even if he were sitting here, would be nodding his head. Like,
He would?
That's really good. That's really good. But yet, I agreed with you very much about the craft of something or the discipline of something. And I keep thinking, I won't sign another contract. I'll learn how to write. Like, I'll study, I'll learn the history and, just kind of the form and the structure and things like that. I think it would be.
There's a beautiful balance between mastery and being a student,
Yeah.
and going back and forth in that is so satisfying to me. Like, when one fails, you can fall over into the other.
Right. Right. And I just can't even imagine, maybe I'll write in another form. I don't know.
Yeah, but write in iambic pentameter or something. Before we get to questions, I got to ask you this. Why do people marry their opposites?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in anything.
No, I find that, I mean, I certainly did. I married my polar opposite. And in the beginning, you think, this is so great, he's so different. And then after a year, you think, why is he not like me? But you said that your partner is your greatest teacher.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
said that in
I
the
would
book.
think that I think there could be different reasons. One reason, which would not be maybe the healthiest reason, is that we will think we will find everything we are lacking in
the
someone
other
else,
person.
and then we get too attached or dependent, and then it doesn't. It has to shift. It can't really stay that way. But I imagine it could be. It's a little bit exotic. It's different.
It's exotic. But you did say, I mean, I just read this in the book about that other person will never fill in those holes, will never make you whole.
Yeah.
And that's the fallacy. An entire pop music industry is built on that fallacy, by the way.
I know. I tried. I asked people in the process of writing the book to send me stories and their favorite pop lyrics and things like that. And I didn't get that many pop lyrics, but
I was thinking about that.
stories.
You told me that you were asking that question, and I thought, well, the most real pop lyric would be Foreigner's I Want to Know What Love Is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All of the other stuff about hookups and breakups and yeah, okay, that's kind of busy work. But the real question is, I want to know what love is.
Yeah. Oh.
I'm waiting for the answer.
The whys are kind of hard, right? The why questions,
Yeah.
like, what is love? I just say connection, like let's strip it away from all those expectations and the undue pressure.
And you also said it's being seen.
Yeah. I had a dream one night. I was in Barre, Massachusetts, where the Insight Meditation Society, which I co-founded, is this retreat center, and I was actually teaching a retreat there. And I was asleep at night, and I dreamt that I was teaching a retreat there. And someone came in to see me in the dream and said, why do we love people? And in the dream, I said, because they see us. And then I woke up. And I thought, that was really good. That was really good.
I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, really. Like, wow. And I think that is true.
It's so true.
Like what you see in your husband when he's playing is something so essential, as you said, that may not manifest. I don't know if it does or not. It may not manifest in the grocery store, or over
It doesn't.
So, but there it is.
But there it is. It's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's his soul.
Yeah. Fabulous. Soul. Okay. Should we sit together just for a few minutes again, and then we'll just open it up for questions? And all these various thoughts and feelings and images, just let them come and go, like wash through you. You don't need to hold on to anything. You don't need to push anything away. So thank you. And we're going to have some time for questions or discussions, questions or comments from you. When the lights come back on.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I just really had a sense of that space between us when we meditated. I was thinking about that. Thank you for that. And thank you also just for the authenticity you bring. You know, you both have been on our stage many, many times now, and I always feel that I really felt that tonight, and I just appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so we do have some time for some questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand, and we'll bring a mic to you. We'll start right here, and then I've got you. Yeah, right here, sir.
Great, thank you. So I'm still trying to formulate this question in my head, but so I spend my days writing grant proposals, and in my free time, I write characters and sometimes actually get to perform them. So two very, very different kinds of writing. And for me, with the characters, one of the most important things is that to really understand them and perform them, I have to fall in love with them. And they may not necessarily be the nicest people, but I have to really just get their essence. And so my question for Rosanne is that you were talking before that sometimes people from the audience scream out, "I love you." And I'm wondering if part of that is related to when you perform a song, do you need to actually fall in love with the song and for it to be authentic? And do you think that falling in love with the song when people scream they love you is what is resonating with them, and that's what's coming back to you? And my question for Sharon is, when you're writing your material, do you feel like to write about it, you have to fall in love with what you're writing about? Because I know that when I'm writing grant proposals, like my objective is to capture the essence, and I want the people reading it not just to be convinced, but to fall in love with, you know, what this subject is about. So I'm trying to get it from both sides.
Well, as a performer, I'm not there to indulge myself and to feel that I have to love every moment of what I do. It's also my work, and I couldn't sing a song I hated. At the same time, I've been singing some songs for almost 40 years, the same song, and sometimes I'm just sick of singing it. But the audience wants to hear it, and I've got to bring my full self to that moment as much as I can for that moment. And that's my work. So it's not that I'm just up there to indulge myself into doing something I love for every moment. That's where the discipline comes in, that you're creating something you love. That doesn't mean that you enjoy or love every second of it, you know, that you're rigorous with the presentation of it. Even if I'm bored with doing this song and I've sung it at least several thousand times, there are people in the audience who really want to hear it, and it's their first time. So, you know, at the very least, I can be in the space that they're in and think, well, I'm doing this for that person. I had a mentor, songwriting mentor, who gave me a great piece of advice once. He said, when nothing's working in a performance and it's, you know, people are on their Blackberries and it's, you know, just nothing's working, he said, remember, there's always 6% of the audience who are poets, and they really need it. They really want it. They're really there to get it. You've got to show up for them.
That's so beautiful. Who is in the 6%?
think we have more than 6% here tonight.
I think we do. I think we've got a good slide. So I don't know. I haven't really conceptualized it in terms of love. I don't feel like I need to love when I'm writing, and often I don't really like what I'm writing, but that's a different question. I feel like I have to tell the truth, and I have to get simple, which are all things I learned in counterbalance to my other tendencies, which were to get, kind of like very floaty. And, it's hard to write about something like love without sounding like a Hallmark greeting card, and for it to be real. Somebody noted how many times the word real appears in my titles, which I don't actually choose, but real love. I would so often just get out in space in writing, and it wouldn't feel very real in the end. And so the counsel I always got was get down, just tell the truth, just tell the story. Don't just try to embellish it, so magnificently that it's like gooey, So that's what I always tell myself, just tell the truth.
That's good.
You're both talking about showing up in a way, too, which I know you talk about as a simile for love. We have a question in the front here.
Hi, thank you both so much. I loved hearing you talk, and I have a two-part question about music specifically, because that's my form of art. So one is, I really appreciated you talking about fear, both of you, and for me, I actually stopped performing. I still write, but I would have such physical anxiety for like 3 weeks before a performance that I kind of thought, oh, is it worth it? And I don't know if that ever goes away, or if there are, like, mindfulness helps with the physical aspects of the fear. That's part one. And part two is, I feel like now that I'm happier, I feel like I shouldn't write about unrequited love, or like the truth that you were talking about, because I don't want to be like living in the dark, even though I know too that sad songs can still open people up, but there's part of me that kind of feels like, oh, maybe I should start writing mantra, music now, and quit it with the pop. So I would just love to hear your thoughts on those things. Thank you.
I don't have fear about going on stage, but there's always that, before you go on, that moment of heightened anticipation. If it's something really big, like Carnegie Hall, like I had fear before I played Carnegie Hall, or something, that's out of the realm of a normal performance. But I know people who have had terrible, terrible stage fright, and some of them keep pushing themselves to the point where I think, why are you torturing yourself? Like, can you let it go? If it's that painful and that awful, can you let it go without making yourself feel bad about it? Because not everybody is a performer, and not everybody who writes music has to be a performer. There are plenty of people who create music who aren't performers. So that's one thing. If it's torture, and it keeps being torture, and it's not, then why? What was the second part?
About, do I have an obligation to start writing more like spiritual?
Oh, see, mantra? Yeah, I don't like that. I like an edge, and I don't want to get rid of the edge. She probably feels more compelled to write about, the good part than I do.
No, keep it real.
Keep it real, exactly. Keep it authentic. I mean, we're still human. We're still going to suffer. I mean, that's what we have in common, right? And art and music are there to reveal our lives to us and reflect ourselves back to us, and it's not all pretty.
And I don't know about mindfulness so much per se playing a role, but for whatever period of time you may wish to experiment to see if you hit a different kind of balance, the way I did, since I was so terrified to begin with. It's more like loving kindness. It's actually kind of a methodology that will help you connect in a different way to everyone in the room. Even if you can't see them all, you only see silhouettes, it's wishing them happiness, wishing them peace, wishing yourself happiness, and peace. And there's a different sense than they're out there waiting to get me, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, here we are together. And I actually learned something about that from the Dalai Lama as well. You know? I was not on the stage with him, although I was close to being on the stage with him. Sorry.
No, I love it.
He was teaching in Tucson one year, and he would speak in the morning and the afternoon, and they wanted Western teachers to speak in the evening, so I was the first evening, and he wasn't there, unfortunately, but, you know, it was like, I think 1,200 people there, and which was, you know, the largest crowd at that point I'd ever talked to, and his throne was behind me, and then it was done, and I was so happy. And the way he was teaching was he would read a passage, and then as it was being translated, he would flip to the next passage. But one day there was something in what the translator said he didn't agree with. So he said, "That's not what I said." And the translator said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "No, it's not." And the translator said, "Yes, it is." So he flipped back to the passage in dispute, and he burst out into this big, big laugh, and he said, "Oh, ha, 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 I made a mistake." And I thought, look at that. If I'd made a mistake in front of those same 1,200 people like a few nights ago, first of all, would I have admitted it? And second of all, would I have been laughing about it? I don't think so. You know, so there's something about that, like, oh yeah, here we are, blew it, let's go on. You know, and you can see if that happens or not.
One more thing about fear, though. You know, some great, great performers lived with stage fright. Laurence Olivier threw up before every performance, but he kept doing it. So, you know, I guess you have to know in yourself, is that your life? Is that your path? And if it's not, if you're torturing yourself for no reason, then let it go without guilt.
Thanks. Other hands, yes, one right here.
I'm curious about, you both were talking about, Rosanne, you said that there are people, you both had kind of traumatic childhoods, and how sad it was that people kind of slip through the cracks and don't connect. And so I am wondering, who was it in each of your lives that, if it weren't your parents, that inspired you to go to India or inspired you to be an artist? Who loved you, you know?
What a great question.
It is a great question, and I've been asked that at different times. I actually don't know who to point to until I went to India, you know, and then I had many teachers sequentially, and they were each very important to me, including one woman, this woman named Deepama, who's the person who told me to teach and therefore created really the rest of my life. And I was being interviewed for something once, and the interviewer said in a kind of very shy, hesitant way, "Do you think you reparented yourself with her?" And I said, "I reparented myself with all of them." You know, but that was once I got there, which is why I look at that moment of how did I get there, you know, and what made me bold enough, and, you know, I can't answer that. I don't know. No, nobody said that. I mean, I took an Asian philosophy. You could say it was disembodied, you know, like, and I'm glad you used the word connection, because I think that's what it's all about, you know, like, I took an Asian philosophy course. I heard about the Buddha. I heard about the Buddha's teaching. I heard there were a couple of things in that course that were really important. One was the really upfront, frank acknowledgement of the suffering in life, which I certainly knew very well internally, but had never had external confirmation about, you know, and so I felt kind of aberrant and weird and left out and isolated forever until, you know, that moment was like, oh, everybody suffers. What do you know? It's not just me. And then I heard about the prospect of there being tools to actually do something about that suffering called meditation. And there was, you know, one of the breathtaking things about the Buddha's teaching is that no one's left out of the field of possibility. And so it wasn't like you had to be of, you know, in those days of noble birth or, you know, certain socioeconomic status. It was nothing like that. Anybody who was interested could do it. So And I heard there were things you could do. So I looked around Buffalo, New York in 1970. I didn't see it anywhere. I haven't been back in a long time. Probably if I was there now, it would be everywhere, right? And I heard about this program. I thought, I'm going to go to India.
I also can't point to one person, but later on when my dad got clean, he was a really good parent about my work, about my songwriting. And he would tell me I was good even when they weren't good. You know, he would just keep encouraging. He was kind of, did really good parenting about that. And later on, my first husband, who was also my record producer at the time, he gave me a lot of confidence when I didn't have it in myself. I was just thinking it was mostly men that I got. My mother did not want me to do it, did not want me to become a musician, didn't want me to be a writer, didn't want me to be an artist, wanted me to get married and have kids and be quiet. And, but, sorry? Right. I mean, her template for being a performer or a musician was that you were a drug addict, you got divorced, you were never home, your relationships fell apart. You know, it was understandable. But I also gleaned parenting wherever I could. Mm-hmm. I just somehow knew to do that. If somebody was nice to me in a store, an older woman, you know, I would take it in. I was smart about that. I still do. It does.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, I have one right here, yeah.
Hi, thank you again, both of you, for being here. So I was thinking about this love. When I was a kid in high school, I read The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. And I wondered in this book, Sharon, in addition to the Dalai Lama and Pema Chodron and Winnicott, you know, via your friend, what were some of the other influences you think, and theories, things you studied? And then the second question, and that is in The Art of Loving, I remember, if I remember this correctly, different types of love, parental love, child love, romantic. What's the common theme, do you think?
Uh-huh. I think the common theme is pure connection. Like we could say authentic connection. In fact, I think that used to be the subtitle of my book. The Art of Authentic Connection, and it became Mindful Connection through some way or another. But I think it is that moment of seeing and being seen, or it's something about authenticity. And authenticity comes in a lot of different ways. It's not just kind of asserting what you want, you know. It might be in expressing your vulnerability, or being willing to not be in charge, or it might be expressing something. I tell one story in the book about a friend of mine who outlived her cancer prognosis by about 40 years, really. And she talked about first getting diagnosed and looking at everything in her life, like absolutely everything. And one of the things she said in describing herself in those days was, I used to be the kind of person who would sit in the car with my husband and I'd be boiling hot. And the most I could bring myself to say was, "Are you warm, dear?" And she said, that changed, you know? So there's something about that feeling of truth, you know, like in that moment. There were a lot of people, Mark Wallen, who had a lot of interesting research that's very contemporary about inherited trauma. You know, the ways it seems we can inherit the traumatic experience of our forebears onto the fourth generation thus far. Because interestingly enough, that's a kind of passageway through time, through genetic expression. And the hot new area, I'm told, of meditation research is not even neuroscience, it's genetic expression.
Wow.
You know, so if perhaps we are inheriting our trauma, you know, generation after generation, wouldn't it be interesting if this tool actually was one of the things that could counter that? Because it works, it seems to work directly on genetic expression. he was one, Sue Johnson. There were a lot of people who I really, I learned from. And the last section of the book is all about love for all beings. And there's a lot in there about people who are at the heart of social movements of different kinds, motivated by love. These three friends of mine from Baltimore, Maryland, who have this thing called the Holistic Life Foundation, which works in the inner city in Baltimore, bringing tools of yoga and meditation to the kids. They're phenomenal. Ai-jen Poo, who's in there, who has two different organizations working with usually women, although not always, who are doing home health care and, don't have union representation and are struggling in a lot of ways. And, so they're people who've really taught me that you can strongly, strongly seek change, but coming from a place of love.
What about you, Rosanne? Are there any particular inspirations you can point to for really this subject of love?
Well, I just thought of something when Sharon was talking about the genetic traumas and living out the history of your ancestors. So the last record I made was about the South, and I spent a lot of time going to the Delta to get inspired to write these songs. And my family was from the South, and I thought I knew about what I was writing about, what I was doing. And what I found out much more deeply about, and very unexpected, was about the suffering of Black people in the South. I knew it cognitively, but it really started to sink in when I was there, how profoundly so many Black people suffered. So, and my grandfather was an Arkansas farmer, and he was a racist, and, stone cold racist. And so I was playing it in Mississippi at this place, Dockery Farms, and it was this big event, and at an after party, after the show, I did my show, there was a party, and there was this 90-year-old Black blues harmonica player playing at the party. And nobody was paying attention. There were a lot of rich white people at this party. And me and the band kept eyeing this musician. We were really the only ones who were kind of interested in him, kept looking at him. So the party ended, and I went over to him. And I kind of knelt down by his chair to say hello, and I said, "It was so wonderful, thank you so much." I could tell instantly he was really uncomfortable that I was kneeling by him. A white woman was kneeling next to his chair. So I kind of stood up, and he didn't say much, and then he said, "Oh, honey," he said, "back in the 50s, when I was behind the plow in the field, we had a radio on the porch. And when your daddy came on the radio, we would all come out of the field and run over to stand around the radio and listen to him." Mm. And I started crying. It's like, my grandfather was just over the river plowing the field, hating that man and everyone like him. And it was this moment of profound racial healing for me. Like, I thought, I borrow from his tradition. He's the prototype. I'm getting all the attention. All these people came to see me, and, I'm winning Grammys, and I got all this attention. But that man who walked behind the plow and he's playing the harmonica, everything I'm doing is borrowing from his tradition and him. And the honor I felt for him and the humility and the realization that the historical trauma in my DNA of my grandfather's racism had to be broken in my generation forever. Mm-hmm. That's a responsibility that I have. And it doesn't have to be a burden, actually. There can be such beauty in it. I don't know why that came up from that question, but
Oh, I'm glad I asked. Thank you both so much. We are nearing the end of our time, but I hope that you'll come on upstairs. Pick up a copy of Real Love in the shop, and Sharon will, and hopefully Rosanne, you'll be upstairs too to chat a little bit further, and Sharon will sign some books. And Sharon, you'll be back, I think, July 5th, Wednesday, 1 o'clock, here for our weekly mindfulness meditation session. Rosanne, I hope you'll be back soon.
I'm going to be back for her meditation.
All right, we'll see you all here in a week, okay? Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you for listening. This podcast has been brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. Join us this summer for the Real Love Challenge. To get your copy of Real Love, visit SharonSalzberg.com. May all beings be happy.